Hello and welcome to this episode of Timeless Topics. This is part one in a two-part series on being the movement. In this episode, we discuss everything from how to teach trauma-informed care and empathy to NICU-itis. We're so excited you're back with us. Let's go ahead and jump into the conversation.
When I think about it, I have tried over my career to really talk to my families and not just that general, how are you, right? Because you know when people say, how you doing? And the pat answer is always, I'm okay, right? But that's not really the answer. And I appreciated it yesterday when someone said to me, hey, how's it going? How you doing? And I was like, surviving. And she was like, good, good, good. So you could tell that she wasn't really listening to my answer. And she didn't really want to hear how I was really doing. And I think that we do that very often with our families in the NICU is that general, hi, good morning, how's it going? And they're like, it's good. And you're like, you know that it's not good because I just gave you terrible news about your child, or the baby has had a really difficult night. But does anybody really stop and hear what they have to say? And I think that that then leads to some of these situations that you were describing, Mary, where as the provider, you don't really know what your suggestions and recommendations mean for that family. How many times have we discharged home a baby and we give the family this list of appointments? You've got eye appointment on Monday, and you've got pediatrician on Tuesday, and you've got cardiology on Wednesday, and urology on Thursday, right? And we just here you go. Show up at these appointments. And oh, by the way, go to WIC and make sure that you get your formula. And if you don't, then your baby doesn't have anything to eat. And oh, don't forget to stop at the pharmacy and pick up your medications too. In the meantime, you've got this 7-pound baby that was born at 22 weeks that has been in the hospital for how long? We just disconnected it from all the monitors and said, here, go. And you're like, whoa, like, you know, and so my question that kind of opens that all up is, how do you teach that? How do we make sure that our providers recognize that and know how to incorporate that into their care? I think it goes back to, I think of my grandparents, and they always talked about the bedside manner, right? And I just don't think that we stop and think about that anymore.
Both in how do you teach it, but how do you recognize it, right? Because then it's like, how do you recognize activation and burnout in a NICU family? Because how you're going to manage them is very different. But we tend to just expect them all to be so happy that they're here when not one person wants to be in that NICU. Like nobody does, you know? Um, and I think that is hard for us as professionals to take that because we want to be there. We chose it, you know?
Well, I feel like we talk about it and we say, oh, this family has NICU-itis, right? And over the years, I feel like I've at least learned that that tipping point is different for every family. You can't pinpoint and say on day 62, they're going to hit the wall. There's some families that it's hour 12 and they've hit the wall and they're like, I am done with this. I am ready to go. And other families will proceed through their entire stay. And I'm sure they feel it, but they don't convey it. They don't let it kind of tip them over. But I don't know that we then know what to do with it once we recognize it. I feel like anecdotally, people start kind of tiptoeing around them and you walk on eggshells, which then I think contributes to our moral distress and burnout because now you've got this added layer of let me stop and think about what I'm going to say to this family because I don't want to set them off, right? And it's about us. It's not about them. It's about making us feel comfortable. So how do we get past that? Even though, yes, we do still need to protect ourselves, right? We've talked a lot about our mental well-being and our mental health, but in the same respect, I have to help this family.
You know, the way the conversation is going is making me think like, I think there's actually an opportunity to use this kind of discovery or observation of this reality, and put in place preventative strategies because it's not like, I mean, saying NICU-itis kind of makes it feel like Oh, I'm so sorry. This is just one of those adverse consequences that happens to you when you come into our space instead of actually kind of thinking about what could we do. We've seen this. We've seen this play out in, so many different folks and even our colleagues, right, who get burnt out and leave. So what is it about the space? What is it about the system? What is it about the experience in these walls or maybe in this entire organization that actually creates that, and then what can we glean from that then to put in place as a kind of antecedent, like a prevention strategy. I was reading this article, and it was actually a little essay from a medical student. And I don't have a lot of experience with medical students, so I was like, oh, this is intriguing, and it was about vulnerability. And this medical student was talking about kind of what their assignment was to really just kind of, collect these things, make some observations, get into some of the ethics around, being a physician and some of that stuff. I'm a bit of a skimmer, so I was kind of like, let me get to the meat and potatoes here. And the student shared this really beautiful story of how, I don't know if it was a he or she, but, had this encounter with the patient. Um, and the patient was just overwhelmed with a recurrent infection. And I'll try and distill this down, but she just, she was following the routine, what the doctors were prescribing, but she kept having to come back to the ED. Things were, the wound kept reinfecting or whatever the situation was. And so the med student actually shares in the paper that, like, in that moment, I had an opportunity. I could just say, okay, it'll be fine, like we do, right? And go get, whoever the chief was or whoever to make to continue the therapy or review the therapeutic plan. But instead, this person was so touched by the poor patient who started to cry. And so this person decided, I'm just going to sit here and just be with this person. Didn't say any words at all, just was with that person. And then once the person, like, processed that kind of acute emotion, um, the clinician excused themselves and went on to do whatever. But that was actually the beginning of a relationship with this student that then the student followed this patient over the next, I think it was like 4 weeks or 4 months or something like that. But that encounter, that, honoring that, blessing that sacred moment of just human to human raw emotion. Actually, this person went on to say, the clinician or the student rather, went on to say that they felt that whatever happened in that, wordless encounter, actually had a therapeutic value and actually helped the person go on to heal. I'm not really capturing it really great, but it was really profound. And then that person, kind of committed. I mean, they were students, so who knows how the system kind of sucked them in and stripped all their humanity away. But, at least set out an intention to really honor that and talked a little bit about the vulnerability of that moment, but how it really helped that person see past, the protocols, the prescriptions, and the checklist stuff, and see the human. And I know saying that, it's easy to say those words. How do you prepare people for that? How do you help people stay grounded in that place and have the courage to thwart, any systems that may try and strip that away again? But it feels like it has that kind of opportunity, and it literally, I feel like, could transform, how not only, the patients and the families experience care when we come back to the NICU, but also how we experience that, that relationship and the care that we get to provide.
No, no, no. I think you made a statement that I think is something that we should explore a little bit more, right? The conversation that this medical student had this realization and this dynamic, and whether or not as they progress through their training in their career, does that get stripped away? And
Mhm.
is that what's happening to us, right? And are we actually talking about these things, teaching these things, encouraging these things? And our students come out so gung-ho and so excited, brand new nurses, brand new NPs, and over time, you see it get chipped away,
Yeah.
right? And I think it speaks to many other aspects of healthcare, specifically that concept of recruitment.
Mm.
Because I look at, and I'll speak for myself, older, more experienced, seasoned, whatever we want to call it, providers, and the bitterness
Yeah.
and the jadedness and the fact that I can't sit with this family the way that I would have 10 years ago
Mhm.
because I now know all of the 15 other things that are pulling at me. Whereas 10 years ago, I'm like, let me just sit and chat with you and let's talk about it, right? Um, yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, I think um, as a nursing professional development person, right? Like one of my favorite parts is that influx of just excitement when they first come into the unit and they're like, oh my gosh, I get to learn about babies. I get to do this, right? And they're so excited and it helps kind of like fill my own cup, right? And be like, yeah, that's why I do this too. This is awesome, you know? But sometimes if you stick around long enough, you do get to watch that process. And some of them I have enough of a personal relationship where I'll go up and I'll be like, what happened? Like, who is the person? Where is that person? And they're like, well, I mean, I had to learn how to survive.
Mhm.
And I was like, see, that we have accountability for as a system and as individual practitioners in the system, right? Because we're kind of allowing this to happen, partially because it's happening to us too, right? But we're not stopping it for other people.
Yeah.
Um, and sometimes it's as simple as, calling out a bias, right? Because a lot of this is really what it ends up coming to. Oh, so-and-so patients always. So-and-so patients always do this. And then now you are using the tool that you were taught professionally, which is look at a series of things and find the pattern, right? And then know how to treat it. But now you're kind of using it for harm in a way. Not intended harm, but harm is still caused.
Mhm.
And so, but then you're looking at someone else and telling them, but don't do it. The whole do as I say, not as I do kind of mentality. But if we're not mentoring and actually role modeling and showing them what does compassion that is still linked to accountability look like in action? Because it's much easier to get into the us versus them kind of mentality, whether the us and them is a patient or a provider or a respiratory therapist, like it could be anybody, right? Management, like it could be anything. So it's much easier to slide into that than choosing to go, sure, I'm upset about, XYZ situation, but what's the best way to come to a resolution here? Is it for me to just sit and stew in it and create this, like huge, vibe of negativity around the whole thing and then take other people down with me? Or is it to say, I don't want this to happen. It happened to me and I don't want it to happen to anybody else. So what do we need to know? What do we need to learn to prevent this?
I think the big challenge is how wicked insidious this is, though, right? I mean, it's to kind of paraphrase Laura Vandernoot Lipsky, it's slow moving, right? And it is very insidious. And so you don't really realize it's happening to you over time until, you have some kind of an acute event or something, right? Or you have some kind of reflective moment. So I think there has to be some kind of forward thinking intentionality because the way we treat each other, the way we interact at that level is exactly how we're going to interact with everybody else that comes into that space, whether it's another discipline, another patient, another family, right? I mean, that's just kind of what happens. Um, and I know sometimes you try and fake it, but that's not sustainable either. And it certainly gets a little bit, it kind of corrupts the authenticity of our encounters then, right? And so kind of coming back, I mean, you're such a great resource to kind of talk about this, Jess, just because you do share a lot of wisdom around your experiences with new graduates, right? Or at least new to specialty folks that are full of excitement and enthusiasm, which is wicked awesome, right? I mean, and so how do we, it's really about preserving and protecting that instead of, how I remember being kind of taught, I'm preparing you, for the sharks that are in the water over here. And it's like, what? I mean, Well, oh, okay. I mean, I guess that does sound like a short-term solution, but the long-term price of that or the cost of that is just, it's, it's overwhelming because it leads to, as what you said, Tracy, right? I mean, you're going to have lower recruitment and, lower retention. You're going to compromise quality of care. Just all of the ripples as a consequence of that disconnect with the humanity. And, you hate to reduce things down to a checklist, but I think kind of at the beginning when we were talking about like all of the things that, fall on the lap of the overwhelmed parent at discharge. I mean, and it's probably been falling on them throughout the entire hospital course, but we've held them in the safety net. They've been in the NICU, right? And then you pull the floor out, and then it's like, and all of the things. And I mean, some of that you can't, you maybe we can't fix it all, but I think, if we could just kind of rewind or maybe do that thing, right? You've heard this folks talk about this, like, so what's your ideal, what would you like this to look like, feel like, sound like, all the things, and then kind of reverse engineer, how do we get there from here? Because we have a beautiful, precious starting point, right? I mean, whether you're a new nurse, a new fellow, a new resident, you're shiny and hopeful. Um, and you bring them into this place, kind of how do we connect that to our ideal goal? Because there's some bad stuff happening here in the middle that is more reactive versus being intentional and humanizing. I don't know.
I think, adults learn best through experience, right? Like we know this. So, creating those experiences, I think, is really important. There's been a big push in the nursing professional development world and medical education kind of everywhere for simulation, right? And I've shared with Mary before that like I kind of like to like rebrand role playing as simulation because when you hear role playing, immediately people are like, ugh, I don't want to do that. You're going to make me do that. But if you call it simulation, they're like, cool, where do I sign up? So it's using those kinds of experiential learning tools to teach more than just technical skill.
Yeah.
Because we focus so much on technical skill, and it is important. I do need you to know the technical ways to save someone's life. But there's so much more to the care that's provided in any unit, NICU or not, than just technical skill, right? So, leveraging that as a learning opportunity, I think is a huge thing that we could all benefit from, right? Even if it's something as simple as communication, right? You start in like, yeah, we're going to run this resuscitation sim or we're going to run this chest tube sim, but we're also one of the outcomes is that the team communicates well. With respect, clearly, everybody is aware of what's going on, closed loop, like all those things, right? Because what that shows over time as you build that expectation is that both skill sets matter. It matters to me how you put this chest tube in or how you do this thoracentesis, but it also matters to me how you respect your colleagues, yourself, and the patient, right? And I think that's a big missed opportunity because we still are stuck with how cool the high fidelity simulators are and look at all the stuff you can do to it, You're like, but if there's not a human represented somewhere, then you're really just reinforcing this hierarchy of I'm up here and you're down here, and that's just how it is. When in reality, we're all humans. We're all impacted by this care. So some in different ways, but we're all walking away being touched in some way. So why can't we start from there and figure out how can we all benefit from it? I also really believe in just sharing lived experiences. Sometimes it's really hard when someone hears someone else's perspective for them to look that person in the face and be like, yeah, but you don't matter. I mean, it's partially why I speak professionally about my experience. We had a storybook outcome. It really is great, but I still had challenges. And so I want you to kind of look at me and say that my challenges didn't matter, that they shouldn't change your practice. Because with all the privilege that I walked into my NICU stay with, of which that list is long, I still struggled. So if it's like this, imagine what it's like for other people, right? And the people that I was able to connect with in those ways, I feel like they were able to say like, oh, I kind of get it now. It's like, because the professional, titles and all the things like open doors. So you're going to listen to me, even though we should be listening to all NICU families,
Yeah.
But if that opens up a door that allows you to reflect and walk away with a different perspective, then I feel like that's what we should do. We should be actively seeking out those stories, and sharing them with people in a safe way for the person who experienced it, so that you can kind of force people to see the humanity.
I
Oh, go
think
ahead.
this also opens up opportunity too for us to think about how we can help our patients learn or our families learn to advocate for themselves, right?
Mhm.
And it really kind of work on looking at our health literacy across the country. And that
Yes.
this may be their first foray into saying, okay, I own my medical care. Yes, these people are the experts. And I think it's that fine line between the situations where they are going to contradict everything that the providers are saying because they've been on Dr. Google versus I've
Mhm.
been on Dr. Google. These questions were raised. I am seeking your expert opinion to help me navigate this, right? Because I recognize that there are things that I don't quite understand. There are things that may be listed kind of erroneous. And so help me navigate it so that I can make the best informed decision for my child. I know that sometimes as a provider, that gets a little frustrating and even intimidating, right? When you have a family come at you with a situation that you're like, oh, so you were out there reading on the internet and now you've come with this. And again, I think that that's that moment where it's about us, not about them. And how do we flip that narrative so that we are all coming to the table with the same objective, which is to get this child home in the safest manner that we can, and to encourage the families to be truly a part of the team. And I know, like I say, I've been there, and I know it's difficult when you have that one family that you feel is coming at you, and you're like, okay, so why am I even here? Right? And so it's that balance.
You're highlighting the whole thing around relational care and trust. Even though, we have our licenses, we have our advanced credentials, we have all of these other, cool, shiny things that make us feel really good. And I don't want to, discredit that. But at the end of the day, and Mia Malcolm used this expression once, and I was like, it's the simplest thing. She goes, "You're still a stranger. You are still a stranger to me. I I get it, you know all those skills, but I don't feel safe right now. And if I don't feel safe, then that makes it wicked hard for me to trust you. And a lot of the behaviors that we see, whether they're verbal or postural or maybe absent, there's, no presence at all of those, we need to really kind of get keen in interpreting what does that mean? Because you're right, you don't know me. So why would you be angry at me? You're not angry at me. You're angry, you're afraid, you're all of these other things. And we have to kind of, like you said, Jessi, about, those skills, and the role playing piece of it to build that muscle, build that skill. It's not about perfection, right? It's about practice. But building that skill to a point where I can at least see that you're challenging me, you're doing all these things. I need to, and I know this is not easy, okay? But I need to move past my bruising ego that's happening right now, right? Because I also have self-doubts about my skills. So you saying them out loud in front of all of my colleagues is just making me feel even more insecure. So how can I really, it's not about turning the table. It's actually about reading the room, really seeing what's going on and starting there.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Timeless Topics. We welcome your feedback and suggestions, so please reach out. Our handle on all social media platforms is @TimelessTopicsNICU, and our email address is timelesstopicsnicu@gmail.com. See you next time.